Welcome to DVC Alumni, where every story inspires the next. The official podcast of the Diablo Valley College Alumni Association. As we celebrate 75 years of DVC's impact on education, careers, and community, we're honored to share the incredible journeys of alumni who've transformed their time on our vibrant campus into meaningful careers, community contributions, and personal success. Each Tuesday, we spotlight DVC alumni, from first-generation graduates to entrepreneurs, educators, and leaders who share the triumphs, challenges, and pivotal moments that shaped their lives. And on Thursdays, it's Resource Thursday. We dive into the programs, departments, and services that make DVC the supportive, dynamic community it is, exploring how they serve students and how you can connect with them. Whether you're a current student, recent graduate, or longtime alum, join us as we honor DVC's legacy and discover how our past continues to inspire the future. Thank you for being part of this journey. Be sure to tune in, subscribe, and celebrate with us. DVC Alumni, where every story inspires the next. And now, join our host, Alumni Manager, Charlie Daly.
National headlines. An estimated 300 million people tuned in during the 1936 Olympics to listen to these very exciting races. While the United States dealt with a declining economy, Germany was preparing itself for the Olympics in Berlin. German hospitality and organization won praise from many visitors. Germany promoted the Olympics in their country with colorful posters, swastikas, and elaborate magazines. In August of 1936, the Nazi regime tried to cover up its violent racist policies by temporarily removing anti-Jewish signs and by newspapers turning down their religious slurs. Few people understood that Berlin was merely a facade hiding a racist and oppressive violent regime. Germany was victorious with more medals than any other country. They won gold in 5 of the 7 events. Propaganda efforts also continued after the Olympics for the international release in 1938 of Olympia, a documentary directed by a German filmmaker. This false representation was to show to foreign spectators and journalists a deceiving image of a peaceful Germany. It purposely didn't show the last sprint of the race because the Germans were upset that they were beaten by the United States. In 1936, 9 working-class men came together by chance at the University of Washington. These men came from low and middle-class families from logging camps, dairy farms, shipyards, and small towns, and had to work harder than most to earn the necessities of life. However, these boys defeated the 2-time Olympic champions, the University of California, in the annual Pacific Coast Regatta and won supremacy of the West. Their next task would be earning dominance on the East Coast against elite Eastern schools for the National Freshman Championship in Poughkeepsie. This would present a challenge for the group of 9 as the rows from these schools were supposedly better than other teams around the country. The race spoke for itself when Washington beat Syracuse, Columbia, Navy, Pennsylvania, and Cornell. After dominating the East and West Coast, as well as earning a world record at the Henley Royal Regatta in Canada, they earned the privilege to row and represent the United States at the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. The long trip to Berlin left the stroke of the United States boat extremely ill, along with unfair lane assignments, troubling weather, and the unfair start. Both reporters and coaches came to a consensus that the chances for the United States were not looking too promising. But
we don't want to give away the ending. But I think you know what happened. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Frank Malachode. I'm a morning news anchor at KTVU in Oakland, and I will be your host tonight and be the moderator with our great author who is just fascinating. Some of you have already met him. I think you're really going to enjoy listening to him tonight. I've got a lot of good questions. And I got to tell you, I feel right at home. I grew up in Orinda and Walnut Creek. I went to Park Mead and then went over to Orinda, Marijuana. Graduated from Cal. My brother's a graduate of DVC. My sister took classes here. So I am feeling right at home. My career, just a quick little tidbit, started in 1985. I was a sports guy in Eureka, California, where I made $9,000 a year, and my parents would send me gift certificates for Safeway saying, buy a steak this week, son. But I learned a lot, went to New Hampshire for 5 years, eventually Boston, Detroit, Boston. And in 2001, I went to the dark side. I left sports and went into news. Sometimes I wonder why I did it, especially now. But I'm one of the lucky ones because I truly love what I do. I always wanted to be a sportscaster, a news anchor. And I'm doing that. I'm still doing it. I'm still eager to get into work. And the best part about my job is I get to meet fascinating people and tell their stories. And tonight, you're going to meet a very fascinating man. But before we introduce Daniel James Brown, I'd like you to meet a woman that has been running the show here at DVC now for nearly 7 years. Please put your hands together for Susan Lamb, the president of DVC.
On behalf of the college, I would like to welcome everyone to Diablo Valley College. As many of you know, this year we are celebrating our 75th year of service at Beach. Hard to believe we kind of did the math on the back of a napkin yesterday or so, and we realized that we have probably sent about 1 million students out into the world. After having their foundation here at the college, we have sent them out into careers and into opportunities to move forward with their lives. Today, we welcome back one of those past students to share their individual story as they left BBC and moved forward into the world to impact it and to continue their story. So we are so proud to share this evening with you and our distinguished alumni, Daniel James Brown. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Before we get to the main event, just a few thank yous to our sponsors that made this all possible. A big thank you to Heritage Bank, Insperity HR Services, Visit Pleasant Hill, and Alta Construction out of Richmond. Put your hands together for them. And now to our speaker, Daniel James Brown. By the way, I thought it was Dan Brown when I was first asked to MC it. And I did a little deep dive for about an hour and a half on angels and demons. And I go, this can't be right. He didn't go to this. Turns out I like this author a whole bunch more. Daniel James Brown is a native of the Bay Area. He began his academic journey, as mentioned by Susan right here at DVC, followed up by Cal, and I do have to throw Go Bears out there. There we go. There we go. At UCLA. In 2024, he was honored with an honorary doctorate from the University of Washington. That was in recognition for his library achievements. He spent a lot of time on that campus studying and trying to get information on this team. I can assure you that you're going to hear more about that as well. Before becoming a full-time author, Daniel taught writing at San Jose State, also at Stanford. That was followed by a successful career as a tech writer and editor. That made him move up to Washington to Redmond. He worked for Microsoft. And now a narrative nonfiction writer. He brings historical events to life with very vivid detail, if you've read the book, and accuracy, making history not only accessible, but compelling and really interesting as well. He's the author of notable works such as Indifferent Stars, Under a Flaming Sky, Facing the Mountain, his latest, and of course, his best-selling book. And while a lot of you are here tonight, The Boys in the Boat, which of course also became a movie. He lives outside of Seattle with his wife. He's got a dog, Quincy, as well, and a hive of honeybees. And when he's not writing, Daniel is bird watching, gardening, fly fishing, reading a lot of American history in search of that next great story, and occasionally chasing bears away from his little beehives. Put your hands together and welcome in Daniel James Brown.
Well, thank you so much. My household, we call that other Dan Brown, That's it. Here. Um, so thank you all for coming out this evening. I am so happy to be here tonight. It's been a very, very long time. I'd like to start by telling you how I first came to set foot on this campus more than 50 years ago. It's a story that I seldom tell anyone. It's a little bit embarrassing, but this seems like a good occasion. In 1969, I dropped out of high school. Beset by crushing anxiety disorders that no one had names for in those days or really understood very well. I stood up one day in the middle of a biology lab and in the middle of a panic attack, walked across the street, climbed in my 1963 Chevy Impala, drove home and announced to my parents that I wasn't going back to school ever, and I meant it. Now, as you can imagine, that caused quite an uproar in my household. My parents sank into sort of stunned silence. I was shattered, depressed, filled with self-loathing, terrified about my future, but utterly unwilling to go back to school and the demons that haunted me there. But in the days that followed, my mother, bless her, talked to the high school and they came up with a plan. I was to go to enroll in correspondence courses and apply the credits I earned back to the school in order to earn a diploma. As part of the deal, I was to spend 7 hours a day. I was to spend 7 hours a day in a library of my choice, completing work. So one early winter day, I packed up all my new course material and drove into Berkeley. I found Doe Memorial Library on the Berkeley campus on a map. I sloshed across the campus in the rain and walked apprehensively into the building under the words "Fiat Lux, let there be light," etched into a slab of granite above the doorway. I made my way up a grand staircase of cool white marble steps and into the vast, quiet, and extraordinarily beautiful space of the North Reading Room with its high vaulted ceilings, its soaring windows, its long rows of oak study desks. Shafts of soft light fell from the tall windows and the skylights above them, burnishing the ancient wood of the desks. The only sounds were the soft murmurings of people out in the foyer and the shuffling of paper. The room smelled vaguely musty, the smell of old pages and leather bindings. Students just a little older than myself sat hunched under green shaded reading lamps, poring over their books, absorbed in whatever they were reading. It was a lovely sight, and I felt at home the moment I saw it. So I found a spot at one of the desks and sat down, opened a book, and sank rapidly and happily into a world of words and ideas from which I have never really emerged. Soon I began staying in the library 8 or 9 hours a day, every day, finishing my coursework in the first 4 or 5, then browsing the stacks for more books, toting armloads of them back into the reading room, propping them open under the green shaded reading lamps and eating them up. So I graduated from high school, after all, albeit somewhat unconventionally. But what was I to do next? I'd seen enough at Cal to know I wanted to be a university student. But what university would take me after my abrupt departure from high school? Again, it was my mother who had the answer. Bless mothers everywhere. BBC, she said, it's in Pleasant Hill. Let's see how you register. And so one day in 1970, I walked onto this campus for the first time. And just as when I walked into that library at Berkeley, at Cal, I knew immediately that I was at home. My years here were among the happiest I can remember. The classes were interesting, the instructors wonderful, my fellow students idealistic like me. This was a period, of course, a great deal of student turmoil across the country at Kent State, in Berkeley, and even here in Pleasant Hill. And that had a bonding effect on all of us, I think. But what I remember most fondly about those years at DVC was one of my instructors, William Spark. Mr. Spark was my freshman English teacher. I took both English 1A and 1B, or whatever they were called in those days, from him. And I flourished in both of those classes. Mr. Spark had just published a textbook, this book, Montage. It's a strange sort of textbook for an English class. It's very reflective of the era in which it was written. It's psychedelic colors. It's basically an eclectic collection of photos, poems, short stories, advertisements, song lyrics, and so on. Mr. Spark would ask us to look at some combination of texts and images, maybe a poem by Keats and a movie still from Casablanca and an advertising for some perfume. And then he'd ask us to write a short piece about what was revealed in examining those images and those words in relation to one another. The central theme of his class was that new ideas are born out of the tensions that arise from holding two or more existing ideas up against one another. He was, in effect, teaching us to think as well as to write. So as I say, I flourished in this class, and after the second semester, he asked me to serve as a sort of unofficial PA the following semester. He gave me an opportunity to prepare some short lessons and lead some discussions, something that helped enormously to bring me out of my shell, develop a sense of self-worth again. And as it turned out, set me on a course to become a college English instructor myself. So I went on to Cal and UCLA, wound up with 3 rewarding careers that led me to where I am today. First, I taught freshman English at Stanford and San Jose State, and actually also some classes at Chabot College, the campus down in Livermore. And while I was teaching, I wrote a couple of freshman composition textbooks myself. Then I was an instructional designer, technical writer, and instructional designer at Microsoft. And then third, and most recently, I became an author of narrative nonfiction books. And by the way, never let anyone tell you that an English degree is a useless degree. That has not been my experience. All 3 of those careers have been interesting and deeply rewarding, some certainly more financially rewarding than others, but all of them fulfilling. And each one has opened doors to new opportunities for me. So what I want to particularly stress tonight is that none of what made my professional life so rewarding would have happened without DVC. It wasn't just Mr. Spark. All my instructors here were smart, passionate about their subjects, and eager to help their students succeed. By the time I left this place, I felt fully myself for the first time since before my adolescence. DVC gave me a chance to get my feet under myself. It helped me up when life had knocked me down. It gave me a space to find my own resilience. And that's the beauty, not just of this school, but of California's community colleges in general. Whether one's path lies through a dental hygiene program, a certificate in drone technology, or the opportunity to transfer to a 4-year school, community colleges like DVC provide a relatively affordable way forward for so many people from all walks of life, even if life has knocked them down a few times before they get here. So that's why I'm so happy to be here. And why I want to thank you personally for coming out this evening to support DVC. Thank you. We're going to have a moderator.
Yeah, we're gonna have a little Q&A. And if you will take the hot seat, I'll give you a couple of questions. Is there a way to turn these lights up a little bit? I don't know what we're trying. Cannot, okay. I don't know what but I won't be able to speak.
That's my permanent condition. You want to show the gold medal race before we start, or we can do it while we're talking about boys in the boat?
Do you want to show it right now?
I can show it in just a second.
So let me explain what we're going to do here. I have a clip here of the gold medal race. If you've not read The Boys in the Boat, it documents the University of Washington USA Olympic team in 1936 rowing against a German boat at Hitler's Berlin Olympics. And that race is the culmination of the story. Most of the story unfolds before we get to that race, but certainly that race is the culmination. And it's a very dramatic race. So I just thought it'd be fun for all of us to watch it, and then we can go on and talk about the book in some detail. A few things you should know before we show this. The day of the gold medal race, it was a rainy, blustery day. The American boat was assigned to lane 6 out in the windiest part of the race course, even though they had fast disqualifying time. So there was something strange going on with the lane assignment. But they were assigned out in the windiest lane. As they rowed out towards the starting line, Adolf Hitler and Hermann Goering and Joseph Goebbels and all the top Nazis came into the regatta grounds dressed in dark capes, and they went up on the balcony of a stone boathouse, and the crowd began to chant "Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil." The rowing events got started. Germany won the first 5 races. They won gold medals in the first 5 rowing events that day. So when the 8-oared race came along, the prestige event, the Americans are paddling out to the starting line. Now the German crowd is chanting Deutschland, Deutschland, Deutschland. They get out to the starting position, they line up. It's so windy that they don't hear the call of the start of the race. So they get off to about a stroke and a half behind all the other boats. Halfway down the race course, 1,000 meters down the 2,000-meter race course, they are dead. The Americans are dead last. Bobby Mock, the American coxswain, the only guy facing forward in the boat, is looking down the race course. Waves are breaking over the bow of his boat. He's watching Germany and Italy over in lanes 1 and 2 streak down towards what seemed to be inevitable gold medal and silver medal finishes. That's not, of course, the way it ends. When the film starts, you'll see the Americans at the very top of your screen, but only very briefly. They will quickly fall out of view. You won't see them again until about 100 meters before the end of the race, and then things will be quite different at that point. So why don't we take a look at it?
Ungarn, England, Amerika, Italien und Deutschland. Zum ersten Mal bei den Olympischen Spielen hat sich ein deutscher Achter bis zur Entscheidung durchgekämpft.
This is the Italians. What's Italians wearing here? And the Germans in lead 1. The Americans. The Swiss, I believe. Germans. The Italians. There's the Americans up top.
Oh, wow.
You can see what it takes out of these guys. It's absolutely crushing. That's Bobby Mock, the American coxswain. Don Hume, who was sick that day, feeling better. Joe Rantz. Anyway,
I get, yeah. I think my first question is, I know they didn't have GoPros back then. How did they get that footage?
yes, that's actually interesting. So that is a clip from Lenny Riefenstahl's Olympia. So all the pulled back shots there were shot the day of the race. But she got the Americans, the Italians, and the Germans to row again the next day. And she put cameras in the boats. And she put them right in the faces of some of the rowers on the coxswain.
Say they were a little ahead of their times back in 1936.
So, you know, I mean, so,
Yeah.
but whatever else she was, well, she was a Nazi. But on top of that, she was also a very good filmmaker. And so she cut those close-ups in. And as the film unfolds, she cuts them in at an increasing pace, which is part of what gives the film that sort of,
Right.
yeah.
Just
Yeah.
builds the steam for it.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back a little bit. How you moved to Redmond, Washington to work for Microsoft. You were a tech writer.
Yeah.
How did you transform from writing tech to going into narrative nonfiction?
Yeah, well, I just sort of, you know, I worked at Microsoft for 12 years at that point. And I mean, Microsoft was a really interesting place to work, full of really smart people. But I didn't have any great passion for what I was doing there. So I had always wanted to be a writer. I'd wanted to be a writer from the time I was here at BBC, at least. And after I'd been at Microsoft for 12 years, I just decided, well, I'm just going to start writing a book and see what happens. And I didn't know anything about it. When you write nonfiction, which is what I wanted to write, you don't have to write the whole book first. You write a proposal and then you get an agent. The agent takes the proposal around to publishers and tries to sell it. And if they sell the proposal, then you write the book. I didn't know that. So I wrote the whole freaking book. So I spent about 2 years writing this book, which is about a forest fire in Minnesota, which my grandfather survived. And there's a whole dramatic story around that. And so that, you know, that got me started. And then things just sort of took off from there.
Well, you've written 4 books. The one about the forest fire, late 1800s, I think, in Minnesota.
1894.
Okay. And did you lose a great grandfather in that fire?
Yeah. So what happened was there were actually 2 forest fires converged on this little town of Hinckley, Minnesota. And as the fires approached the town, they sort of collapsed into each other. It was absolutely horrific. Extreme fire situation. They tried to evacuate the town by backing, there were 2 trains in town, and they tried to back the trains out of town. So with the citizens of the town aboard. My great-grandfather worked in the lumber mill. He and other mill hands were sent to fight the fire. But my great-grandmother and my grandfather, her son, got on one of these trains. As the train was backing out of town, it caught fire. And so by the time they were 3 or 4 miles out of town, the whole roof of the train was on fire. The train came to a stop in a sort of swamp called Skunk Lake. The people that got off on one side of the train all died in the fire. The people that got off on the other side stumbled into the swamp and immersed themselves in the water up to their noses and survived. And my grandfather was one of those who survived.
Okay. Well, another book is about a young woman's plight during the Donner Party. Your tale of the 36 Olympic boat, of course, the boys in the boat, and your latest Japanese Americans fighting in the U.S. Army and what they went through, the scorn and the racism. I'm thinking you like an underdog, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have always been drawn to stories, about, the way I think about it is ordinary people doing extraordinary things. People I can identify with. Obviously, it started with my grandfather. I could identify with my grandfather, but just ordinary people confronting extraordinary challenges of some kind. That's always interested in me. How do people react to those kinds of challenges? And how do they persevere through very difficult times? That's just sort of the thing I'm always interested in.
Yeah, well, that is a theme that runs through your 4 books. Tell our audience how The Boys in the Boat came about. Literally a knock on the door, right?
Yeah, so actually we were having a homeowners meeting, one of these horrible
HOA?
meeting.
Oh, lovely.
It was horrible. I think it was a fight over whether to pave the road into the neighborhood or not. Although I think that night the discussion was about what paint color you could paint your mailboxes or something. And people were in each other's throats. It was just awful. But after fighting, as people were leaving, my neighbor Judy came to me, and I just knew her as Judy, didn't know anything about her. And she said she'd been reading one of my earlier books, The Fire Book, to her father, and her father was enjoying the book and wanted to meet me and would I come down and meet him. And so I think it was the next day I went down and I met this elderly gentleman named Joe Rantz. And Joe was in the last couple of months of his life, as it turned out. He was on oxygen. He was very weak, but he was very alert mentally. And he was stretched out on a recliner. And I didn't realize, but Judy had an agenda in having. She started prodding her dad to tell me about his childhood, about growing up during the Great Depression and this horrific family situation he had, where he was basically thrown away by his family. And that in itself really got to me. But then he started talking about how he began to row and crew at the University of Washington and how that had sort of started to turn his life around. And then how he and his crewmates had gone to Berlin in 1936 and rowed against a German boat in front of Hitler and won an Olympic gold medal.
Did something go off? I'm thinking maybe it might.
Yeah. So, stories like that just don't walk every day. And so I was completely mesmerized from the moment I met Joe Rantz. I was just, and it was interesting because, as I say, I didn't realize, but Judy had been trying to find somebody for years to write her dad's story. And so she sort of was manipulating the conversation to bring.
So there was a reason for the knock on the door.
There was a reason. And,
Well, I'm glad you answered the door.
yeah.
And so is everybody else. Tell us about Joe. He lived for another 2 months. Were you able to glean his story, or did it come from his daughter, or what?
Yeah, I was able to talk to Joe a few times, half a dozen times probably, but he was getting weaker every time I talked to him. As I say, it was in the last couple of months of his life. And he did pass away. Again, it got to the point where I just couldn't really do that. But after Joe passed away, Judy had spent probably the last 5 or 6 years of her dad's life documenting it. Making tape recordings and asking him questions and taking notes and asking him really detailed questions like, what kind of food was in the refrigerator the day your parents got up and drove away and left you behind? And, these little kind of details.
Those are good nuggets, right? Yeah.
So it took me 4 years to write that book. A lot of that time was spent in Judy's house, sitting down with Judy, going over the details of the story. And so she really was, completely invaluable. I couldn't possibly have written the book without her. And it was a very emotional thing for Judy. I've probably met with her 20 times, and I don't think not one of those meetings did she not cry at some point. It was a very emotional thing for her.
I know you spent hundreds of hours at the University of Washington Library. And not only to capture and make it authentic that day, but also what was the city of Seattle like during the 30s and capturing Germany, under Hitler's reign in 1936. It went pretty deep for you, didn't it?
Yeah, it was an intense amount of research. And And you mentioned life in Seattle, for instance. Well, I didn't know anything about life in Seattle. I didn't know anything about life anywhere in the 30s. I wasn't around.
Yeah.
But I grew up down here in the Bay Area, and so I particularly didn't know anything about it. And I really wanted to get it right. So one of the things I did was I went dozens and dozens of times to Suzzallo Library, which is the big library at the University of Washington campus. And I sat down at microfilm readers, and I read newspaper articles from the 1935, 36, 33, 34, 35, and 36. And I'd start by looking for stories about the crew, but then I would often spend hours after that just going through random issues of the Seattle Times or the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, reading about what movies were showing in town and just life of Seattle during the Depression. And I probably didn't use maybe I used 10% of the stuff that I absorbed that way, but I got this sort of overall sense of what life in Seattle during the 30s was just by immersing myself in
It had to be right and real, right?
Yeah, it had to be absolutely. One of the more gratifying things about the book, I think, has been is I've met since the book came out a lot of people who did live in Seattle in the 30s, and so far, at least, they've gone out of their way to say that it's accurate in that regard.
Give us a nugget you uncovered in the library, in the bowels of the library, late one night or one early morning that helped you enrich one of your characters or just made your story more real.
I don't know if it was in the library. It was probably talking to Judy, but one thing I don't know, several months into the project, maybe 6 months in, I was reading all this stuff about the crew, and I was talking to Judy about the crew, and this name Pocock kept coming up. And I asked Judy, well, who's this Pocock guy? Oh, he's a boat builder. He's a boat builder. And I said, okay, I don't really care about the boat builder. Who cares about who built the boat? And so it took a long time. Judy kept saying, Pocock, you should learn about Pocock. So finally, I said, oh, I better find out who this guy was. He built the boats, but whatever. So I did this deep dive into George Pocock, who was this incredible craftsman who built these beautiful cedar racing shells. And they were really state of the art in the 1930s. Every collegiate rowing program in the country had Pocock shells or desperately wanted them. But he was also an artist. He was a craftsman. And in addition to that, he was a sort of mentor to all the rowers at the University of Washington. And for generations, he sort of taught them about rowing and about life in broader terms. He was kind of a philosopher, a sort of Yoda-like figure. And so he actually became a really important part of the book. It opened up this door into a whole part of the story that I had, not known was there, except that Judy kept telling me it needed to be there. So actually, I should credit Judy. Every chapter, where was that? Okay. That better? Okay. There we go. I start all over.
Ladies and gentlemen, so you wrote this book.
Anyway, Pocock, so the Pocock angle turned out to be really important. And actually, I should credit Judy because it was her idea to put a little quote from Pocock at the beginning of every chapter of the book. And at first I was reluctant to that. I hadn't seen this, often an epigraph like that will be different authors at the beginning of every chapter. She wanted Pocock, every chapter started with something Pocock. And so I embraced that. And it turned out to be a really good idea, I think, because as you're reading the book, Pocock just sort of, his presence hangs over the story. And in fact, that's the way it was for the crew. He was just sort of a presence in their life, a very positive, affirmative presence. And so I think it was a good idea.
Let's go to Germany. You wrote a little bit about the Holocaust, but you didn't put it in the book.
Yeah.
Tell us why.
I actually, I think I was telling you before the event that I can only write when I become obsessed. And so I became obsessed with the cynical Nazi effort to use the Olympics as propaganda, and particularly with Joseph Goebbels' effort to do that. Joseph Goebbels was the Nazi minister of propaganda. So I became completely obsessed with Goebbels and all this stuff that he did to manipulate public opinion. And I wrote, as I was writing the book, I wrote probably 80 pages about Goebbels. And my editor wisely took about 78 of those pages out. Because she's right. A little Nazi goes a long way.
In that case, yes.
He really, yeah. So, but so I wound up.
Perhaps another. So when did you sit down? Was it an arduous task when you wrote this book? I mean, you say you get obsessed. Do you write morning, noon, and night? Do you have to be in the mood? How does that work?
Yeah, so I wish I read about other writers, and I know many of them are very disciplined, and they get up and they sharpen their number 2 pencils and put them in a certain order, and they have a whole ritual, and they write from 10 to noon, and then they take a walk. I'm nothing like that. I have a complete chaos in my writing. I write when I am able to write, and I guess I'm only able to write when I've been thinking about what I want to write long enough that it has to come out, if that makes any sense. I will, like if I'm working on this big project, The Boys in the Boat, and I know now that I need to talk about the Poughkeepsie race in 1936. And that was a really important race and a really interesting race. And I want to get it right. So I'm holding off on writing it, reading about it, reading the details until I get to the point where I gotta write this down. And so that may come at 2 a.m, it may come at 8 a.m, it may come at any time, any day. It's frustrating because I probably could get the whole project done more quickly if I did have a set routine and a schedule, because there's often long periods of inactivity. But that's what works for me.
Would you, I mean, I write too, nothing like you. I mean, minute 30 is long for what we do, but I always look at putting at least a news package together, almost like a puzzle. You've got these players and they did X, Y, and Z, and you got to find a way to mold them all together.
Mm-hmm.
So with the book, did you start with the start and go to the finish, or were you writing where did you go with that?
Well, yeah, my writing process is outside.
Well, it's worked out pretty well.
Well, in the case of that book, and I think more or less true of the others, I spent probably the first year just creating a timeline. I literally had a Word document that was about 30 pages long, just one-line entries. April 24th, 1935, this happened. I mean, I had to get all the stuff that happened between fall of 1933 and August 1936 in chronological order. And again, I probably only used some very small fraction of the stuff that was on that timeline, but I had to get the whole timeline out there first. And then the way it works for me is I went back and I started fall of 1933. Joe shows up at the University of Washington, first scene, first act, first scene. And I just progressed through the chronology of the story, starting with that first scene.
Can you talk about symbolism? I wrote a Cal for 1 year. And when you get an 8 that's just flying and the oars are going in perfectly, there's a sense of teamwork and trust. And you've got these blue collar Seattle men, boys that are about to beat the Germans under the national spotlight with Adolf Hitler watching, and they're Depression era boys. It says a lot about that generation, I think.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I mean, you admire that generation. Literally beginning in 1929, the stock market crash, and beginning with the Dust Bowl, really, that everybody in that generation, pretty much almost universally, they all found themselves in the same boat, literally, well, not literally, figuratively, in the same boat. And they had to learn to pull together to get through first the Depression and then World War II. which is a staggering thing. In World War II, I don't think most of us who didn't live through that really understand what a monumental undertaking that war was. So my point is, yeah, they had to pull together, and so these 9 guys in a boat who have to learn to pull together. It is a metaphor or a symbol for what that generation did. And it's not like I set out to write it as a metaphor, but it became obvious to me by the time I was done that this was a representation of what that generation did.
Were any of the other oarsmen in the boat alive when you wrote the book besides Joe?
Yeah, no, there was one of Roger Morris was still alive, and I went down to Joe to interview Roger, but his memory had just unfortunately unraveled.
Yeah.
So it didn't work.
I imagine in each book you learn a little something about yourself too. What did you learn writing this one?
Very inefficient writer.
We got to work on that. Come on.
Despite Mr. Sparks' efforts to make me a good writer, he really was by Mr. Sparks. What I said at the podium was really important thing to use. Bill Sparks turned me into a writer. It just took a long time for it to happen. What was the question?
What did you learn? Is there something you took away from this story? I mean, all your stories are very personal. So, and you dive into them like they're your child.
Yeah,
It must affect you a little bit.
it does. I mean, it certainly makes me appreciate how small my challenges have been. You know, I talked about my challenge with adolescent anxiety disorders. Is this working? The challenges I've had in my life are so small compared to the challenges of so many other people, including some people in this room that I know that have overcome, had to face things that are just unimaginably difficult. So it has made me appreciate, help me keep perspective on my challenges, my troubles. And so all these stories I've written about, you know, the young woman, the Donner Party, the people who died in that fire, the Japanese American soldiers fighting in Europe, all of these people overcame so much difficulty. And they did it in most cases with such humility and such grace. And I think that's one of the things that characterizes that generation. And I said I'm a big fan of that generation. One of the things I really admired in that generation was their humility, the way they approached life, their appreciation for simple things, their reluctance to let their egos become the most important thing in their lives. You know, most of these guys came back to Seattle with these Olympic gold medals. And one of the things that was remarkable to me was that virtually all of them, they came home and they took these gold medals and they put them in a sock drawer someplace. And then they went out and they tried to get a job for the next semester to get through another semester of college. Some of them literally never told their kids until their kids were adults that they had rowed in and won an Olympic race. But 2 of them did that.
And no fanfare either coming home.
No fanfare. I mean, nothing. They didn't kids and drafts. No real fanfare. So there was this humility and honesty to them.
Well, you mentioned the medal, and I think this is a great story. His medal got lost, right? And was rediscovered. Tell the story behind the gold medal.
Yeah, so one of the first times I talked to Joe was Judy showed the gold medal. They had it on a little shelf in their home. And she told me the story that for many years, like 20 years, it had gone missing. They couldn't find it. And it was only when Joe was very handy with woodworking, and he built their barn. He did all kinds of construction and woodworking. He was remodeling something up in the attic, working on the attic, and he found the gold medal buried in a bunch of insulation in a squirrel. In those squirrels did this. It's apparently a squirrel taken the gold medal and secreted it in this nest in the insulation.
That's funny. My gosh. Well, I'm glad they found it. How about Joe's family, Judy and the family? What was their reaction to the book? And what kind of reaction did you get from the rowing community as well?
Yeah, so I think because Judy worked so closely with me, the family was enormously excited that we were doing the book. She had been enormously happy about the book. Judy actually goes out and gives talks about the book herself all the time. So, and actually, I'm happy to say it's not just Judy and her family, but the families of all 9 of the guys have been really excited about it. Very, very much pleased with it. So that's gratifying to me because, when you write about other people's loved ones, especially when they're gone, there really is a burden that's placed on you to get it right, particularly to get it right for the family members. So I've been very gratified that they've been pleased by it.
Well, the 7 other rowers in the coxswain, when you connected with their families, were they, let's do it? Or were they, I don't know?
No, everybody was very forthcoming. Everybody was saying, I think one of the things that was going on is these families had been sitting on this story at that point for 70 years or whatever it had been. They wanted the story told. Particularly Bob Mock, the coxswain. Bobby Mock, as I say, most of them came home, didn't talk about it, went about their lives. Bob Mock spent the rest of his life trying to get that story told.
I bet.
He was never he was literally the voice of the crew. And so he used his megaphone, even long after they were in the rowing days were over, to get local news organizations to do a reunion row or things like that. He was very, very active in trying to keep the story alive.
It's like Micah Ruzioni. I covered him, of course, won the gold medal in 1980, beat not the Germans, but the Russians. And Mike has made a lifetime just from that gold medal night, which was not the gold medal game when they beat the Russians. They had to win one more. Well, this became a movie. I've seen the movie. A lot of folks, I'm sure, here. How did that come about? And what is George Clooney really like?
Well, how it came about very slowly and painfully.
Okay.
So the day after I sold the book rights to the Viking Press, who published it, my agent started getting calls from people in Hollywood. And I was vacationing with my wife down in Tucson. And I had spent the whole day before locked in the hotel room talking to the different publishers as they were bidding on the book. And so the next day I got up and we were going to play tennis, and my agent called and said, "Don't leave the room. Calls coming from Hollywood." So I spent another day in the room as all these phone calls came in from different Hollywood entities. The long and short of it is that day I wound up selling the movie rights to, of all people, Harvey Weinstein.
Oh,
About whom I knew nothing. Actually, I did know one thing. This was in March. This is about a week after the Academy Awards that year. And so my wife and I had watched the Academy Awards, and we watched Harvey Weinstein go up to the podium, I don't know, 3 or 4 times. They got Oscars. So when my agent said these various people have made bids, who do you want to go with? The only name I knew at all was Weinstein. So anyway, that turned, of course, out to be a nightmare. So it's maybe more detail than you need, but as the Weinstein company went down the drain, the rights to the film got bumped around in Hollywood to different entities, wound up finally in MGM, who hired Clooney to direct. And so that took like 10 years.
really?
Well, between the selling of the Weinstein and Clooney taking, or MGM taking. But anyway, Clooney actually called me shortly after he signed on to do it, and he was great actually. He spent probably 40 minutes on the phone with me, telling me how much he loved the story, what he wanted to do with it, and so on and so forth. And so that part was good. I suspect people want to know how I feel about the film.
Well, that was my next question. Did you like the movie?
It's a nice, sweet little movie. It's uplifting, it's fun, kind of movie you can take your family to. And on that level, it's fine. It's not the movie I would have made. The movie I would have made would have had much more character development, much more about Joe Rantz in particular, so you know why he is the way he is when the film opens, the film as it is. But the film I would have made. Well, I don't know how to make a film. Probably would have cracked. But it also would have cost 50, which is about 8. I think they spent 40 million. And it would have been 4 hours long. Nobody wants to see it. So anyway, so I had an experience about it. Clooney was great. I think Clooney did what he could with the script that he had. I think the problem was the script.
Is his phone number in your cell phone?
No, it's not.
Okay. Well, we weren't going to ask for it. So, well, let's talk about your latest. Facing the Mountain, a true story of Japanese American Army heroes and how they came about during World War II. How did that book come to mind?
So I was actually, Seattle had a thing called the Mayor's Arts Award. And every year the Mayor of Seattle gives an award to 2 or 3 people that have made a contribution to the arts in Seattle. So some number of years ago, it was given to me and a guy named Tom Ikeda. And so at this ceremony, I was listening when Tom Ikeda got up and he explained what he did. Tom has for 25 years been collecting, videotaping the oral histories of Japanese Americans, particularly the generation that went through the World War II experience. And so I was listening to Tom talk, and after the ceremony, we talked some more. And then he's made all these oral histories available to anybody on a website called densho.org. So I went home and I got on densho.org and I started listening to and watching some of these oral histories that these families had to tell. And I just was mesmerized. There are so many great stories, really touching human stories. And so then I spent the next year or so working with Tom, trying to figure out, I don't want to try to tell the whole Japanese American experience here, but what angle on it do we want to take? And finally, with some help from him, we decided to focus on 4 young Japanese American men of draft age at the time of Pearl Harbor and what their next several years looked like. And so one of them was Gordon Hirabayashi, who was an objector. He refused to be incarcerated. He was a Quaker, a pacifist, and very, very interesting guy from the University of Washington. The other 3 all wound up serving in the 442nd, the all Japanese American army unit that fought against the Germans in Europe. And so the book just traces their lives and the lives of their families, members, many of whom are incarcerated in the camps back home, which of course was an enormous part of the experience of the war years for them. So it's really the intertwined story of these 4 young men and their families.
And the deep dive on that, outside of talking to the families, where did you go to get the information?
Well, fortunately, one thing Tom has assembled, in addition to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these oral histories, he has digitized and archived newsletters from the camps, thousands and thousands of pages of newsletters from Manzanar and the other camps. And then Tom opened up all these avenues within the Japanese community for people that I could talk to. Tom knows everybody of Japanese descent in the Western Hemisphere. I think he's the most well-connected guy I've ever met.
Connected.
Really nice. Anyway, so just working with community members, doing a lot of archival research again, listening to lots and lots of oral histories. I went to Hawaii. A lot of the story unfolds in Hawaii. The Japanese American experience in Hawaii was quite different from that on the West Coast. And that was an important part of the story. I went to Europe and visited some of the battlefields where the 442nd fought. So I do try to go I can't always, but I try to go when I'm writing about a place or something that happened. I try to go to the actual place where that happened because I often can pick up just lots of little details that enrich the telling.
So when you get an idea for a new book and you do a deep dive, do you basically say goodbye to your wife for 4 or 5 years? Honey, I'm going to Poland. I'll see you.
Yeah, well, I think she learned from the boys in the boat that maybe it'd be better to be involved with me in the writing of the book. Because during writing the boys in the boat, my head was in the 1930s, you know, at the dinner table, I'd be sitting there staring off into space, and my wife and my daughters would be trying to talk to me. As I say, I only write when I'm obsessed, and when I'm obsessed, I'm not very good company. But for Facing the Mountain, she got very involved actually with the research. She became my co-researcher, basically. So couldn't have written that book without that.
And how long did it take to write that?
That took about 3 years.
When you start, you've written 4. When you start a book, are you thinking, oh my God, here I go? Well, is it something you embrace, or is it almost like it possesses you?
Yeah, it does possess me. If it doesn't possess me, I shouldn't be writing. You know, that's like where obsession comes in. So I basically enjoy it. I mean, it's a lot of work. There's times when you've been sitting for 8 hours in a Suzzallo library hunched over a microfilm machine when you'd rather be doing something else. Some of the research can get tedious, but by and large, I enjoy it very much.
Well, with that said, how about book number 5?
My eyesight's gotten very bad. So I don't think I'm going to take another big research project. I've been fooling around trying to write fiction, and it's very hard.
Why is that? It's
When you write, talking to Laura Billingham about this. I asked her if she'd ever consider writing fiction. She said no. She needs a scaffolding of facts, and that's what I'm finding too. I think I'm quite good at taking a lot of facts, assembling them, and presenting them in a compelling way. Starting from nothing except what's up here. Apparently, there's not that much up there. It's just real. The blank page, for the first time in my life, the blank page is really scary.
a little scary. Where do you write?
Wherever I have to.
Coffee shop?
Well, yeah,
Oh.
I used to go. It's true. The first 2 books I would go I'd go to coffee shops and write in coffee shops. And one of the good things about living in the Seattle area is that you have long, dark winters and lots of coffee and lots of nice, cozy coffee shops. So that was helpful in getting there. I do that less and less. More and more, I just sit on my sofa with my laptop perched on my lap.
Could there be another movie in the making with your other 3? The Donner Party sounds like.
Actually, we have a deal. One person has to sign on it to do a movie of The Indifferent Stars Above, which is this story of this young woman at the Donner Party. So
Give us a little tidbit on that, because it's fascinating.
yeah, so Donner Party. Obviously, people think of that. It's the first thing you think of, and that's an important part of the story. But I became obsessed with this one young woman named Sarah Graves. Sarah was 21, and she had just gotten married when her family decided to head for California on the Overland Trail. So she and her young husband decided to go with the rest of her family. She had to choose between staying behind with her husband's family and never seeing her own family again for the rest of her life, or undertaking this treacherous journey to California. So she decided to go to California, wound up, her party merged with the Donner Party, wound up, of course, stuck in the mountains, as we all know. But Sarah was one of a handful of relatively young, healthy people who decided to hike from Donner Lake out over the summit and down into the Sacramento Valley. And 15 of them started off. 5 of them, including Sarah, made it out. And then they got word to the outside world that what was happening up in the mountains, and that began a series of rescue expeditions.
Soon to be in theaters.
Well, we'll see. It's being optioned for a film. Option is one thing, actually getting into a film. So,
Well, we only have a couple more minutes, but as I mentioned, your books are deeply personal. You immerse yourself into the history of the time and certainly into the families and those that you speak to. I'm curious if you stay in touch with some of the folks that helped you write these books.
Oh, yeah. I'm very close with Judy family, particularly, and some of the other families. And also, as I say, with Tom Makeda, and I have become extremely close friends. And some of the family members that I've met, particularly some folks in Hawaii that I've met, Japanese American families, I've become very close to. It's a natural consequence, I think, of diving that deeply into somebody's family history. I mean, it's only going to work if the family is on board with it. I don't want to do it if the family is not on board with it. So again, for instance, with the Japanese American family, I'm thinking of Hawaii, Mariko, my friend there, she got me in the back room of her grandmother's house in all these stacks of documents and yearbooks and all this stuff about Katz, one of the characters in the book, about his youth and his life. And she and I spent days in there going through papers and stuff. And so I got to know her very well. Yeah.
Do you ever get writer's block where you just, I'm over this, and take 2 weeks and go to Hawaii and lay on a beach?
Not until I started writing fiction.
The fiction's hard.
Yeah, fiction's good.
Yeah, very good. What a delight to chat with you. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together. Before we say goodbye, I'd like to bring up a dear friend of mine, a attorney brother and a pal friend. Pete Zablos is his name. He's with the Diamante Scholars Program, which he started here. And I'll let you take it from there, sir.
Okay, thank you so much, Frank. And yeah, I'm with the Diamante Scholars Program. I'm also the chair of the DVC Foundation. And I'm a DVC alum. And I had a similar path that Dan did. DVC changed the whole direction of my life too. So it's great to be here with you tonight, Dan. But first, let me thank Frank Malico. He let the cat out of the bag. We went to college together. And Frank, in appreciation of your service and dedication to journalism and education, we are proud to name a scholarship after you.
Oh, wow.
This May, a deserving journalism student at Diablo Valley College who embodies the same passion, integrity, and drive you've demonstrated throughout your career will be recognized with the Frank Malico Journalism Scholarship.
Oh, my God.
I'd like to tell you that while we were in college, Frank was one of the few guys I knew that knew exactly where he wanted to be when he got out of college. He could make into his broadcaster voice. He would have us just laughing. And then here he is, this incredible journalist that we've had here tonight. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And now I'd like to address our attention to Dan. And I was connected to Dan through somebody at Den Show who I know. And that person introduced Dan and I an email. And Dan and I had this great conversation about, would he consider coming and speaking to me about speaking at DVC, and he was very receptive to that. And in that same email conversation, we found out we'd gone to the same high school together. Not together, but the same high school. And then, it's getting late in the night. And his next reply is, I think I need to sign off because I need to meet George Clooney tomorrow morning at the University of Washington Boathouse. And I put my lap on, and I turned to my wife and I said, when did Dan Brown ever imagine that he'd be signing an email off saying, I have to meet George Clooney tomorrow? But Dan, in gratitude for your exceptional contribution as an author, alumnus, and inspiration to the Diablo Valley College community, And I have to say, that's exactly what this was tonight. Your work exemplifying resilience and triumph has inspired countless students and readers around the world. To honor your legacy, the Daniel James Brown Scholarship is established to support a deserving English student who demonstrates both a passion for literature and a commitment to excellence. Well, thank you for empowering future generations of writers and thinkers.
Thank you so much.
So as we come to close this evening of incredibly inspiring talk and recollection, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thanks to Dan for sharing his wisdom, stories, and insights with us. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, without whom this evening would have been possible, and to the DVC Alumni Association, and to my ability to read while to Leon Valley College, thank you for your continued support in creating opportunities like this for learning, connection, and inspiration. And finally, thank all of you for being a part of tonight. This is a really special evening. Thank you all for being here and sharing with all of us. I think, well, I think that's it. I think we're done. Thank you for coming. Thanks for being here.
Well, that was a surprise. Yeah. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Oh, how are you? Oh, my God. That's great.
That's the one I want to do.
Thank you for tuning in to DVC Alumni, where every story inspires the next, the official podcast of the Diablo Valley College Alumni Association, celebrating 75 years of DVC's incredible impact on education, careers, and community. We hope today's episode gave you valuable insights into the journeys of our alumni and the powerful resources available at DVC. Don't forget to join us every Tuesday for inspiring alumni stories, and on Resource Thursdays, where we spotlight DVC's departments and services, showing you how they're shaping student success. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries and exploring the connections that make DVC's legacy so special. And remember, DVC Alumni, where every story inspires the next.